We have resumed the budget hearings, and we're now with the Metropolitan Nashville Public Schools. And Dr. Register, if you'd like to introduce yourself and anybody you brought with you, and then make whatever presentation you'd like to make.
Thank you, Mayor Dean. Of course, I'm Jesse Register. I'm Director of Metropolitan Nashville Public Schools. We have Mr. Will Pinkston with us, who is Chair of the Budget Committee, Budget and Finance Committee for the Board of Education, and Mr. Chris Henson, who's Chief Financial Officer, and Mr. Pinkston's going to start, and then I will pick up after that and lead into Chris.
Thank you, Dr. Register. Good morning, Mayor Dean, Mr. Hinote, Mr. Riebling. I'll be brief. My name, as Dr. Register said, is Will Pinkston. I'm the Budget and Finance Committee Chair for the Metro Nashville Board of Public Education. We are pleased to be here this morning to present the proposed 2013-14 operating budget for Metro Nashville Public Schools. We've worked hard over the last 60 days to put together what we believe is a responsible budget that addresses the needs of the nation's 42nd largest school system and its 81,000 students and 6,000 teachers. Would like to acknowledge the presence of another board member, Ms. Jill Spearing, who represents District 3 in the Madison area. I represent South Nashville on the board. I'll turn this back to Dr. Register and Mr. Henson in a moment, but if I could first, I'm a former newspaper reporter. I always look for the headlines in things, and the key takeaways on this budget, the headlines are, we are requesting a nearly $44 million increase for the upcoming year, about a 6% increase over our current operating budget. We understand and acknowledge that it's a sizable sum, but as I said, this is a budget that we believe meets the needs of our schools and the community. About 39% of the requested increase is wrapped up in various salary and insurance adjustments, some of which is state mandated. Mr. Henson can explain those details. About 45% of the total increase is wrapped up in various proposed improvements, including most notably growth in charter schools, the addition of 5 schools, and the expansion of existing schools. Also, within that 45% is the addition of more than 20 new teaching positions to accommodate projected growth in the system. We are one of the few urban school systems in America that's growing, and we think that is directly attributable to the vibrant economy and the quality of life in Nashville and to our city's leadership, especially in the mayor's office. Smaller portion of the overall requested increase is to offset the loss of federal funds in 2 major categories. First, federal budget cuts are having an impact, which Mr. Henson can explain. Also, we're planning for the continued wind down of federal stimulus funds, including those received through Race to the Top. In some cases, we are proposing to permanently fund positions that have been federally funded, which we deem vital. For example, more than 40 positions supporting our exceptional education efforts. We think those positions are too important to cut and hope that you and the council agree. Also, through Race to the Top, we've identified some high-yield innovation strategies, including investments in data, STEM initiatives, science, technology, engineering, math, and others. We believe these warrant continued funding after the federal dollars run out. In short, we know we're asking for a lot, but we feel like this is a responsible budget that addresses the needs of the system and the community as a whole. With that, let me turn this back to Dr. Register and Mr. Henson to explore the details.
Thanks, Mr. Pinkston. I'll reiterate some of the headlines that Mr. Pinkston noted and be also brief with my comments and let Mr. Henson walk through the budget. First thing I want to say is that to Mayor Dean and Metro Council and to the staff that we acknowledge and appreciate the support through the years through the economic crisis. Hopefully we're seeing brighter days in the future, but we should not begin a conversation like this without acknowledging the fact that the mayor and the council have made education the top priority in this community. We appreciate that, and we've been able, through an economic crisis over the last few years in our country, been able to continue and develop new programs, which makes us quite unique in the country. Our local budget has increased significantly. The request this year is for $764 million. I will say this, it doesn't do everything we'd like to do. There are other things that we think are important, but to move through the past few years and get to this point is commendable, and we appreciate your continued support. There are some impacts on our operating budget that I think are significant, and I want to speak to these and to perhaps enhance to some extent comments that Mr. Pinkston started with. Our enrollment, we're very unique. We did a survey with the Council of Great City Schools and looked at enrollment growth across the country. There are 67 school systems in the Council of Great City Schools reporting data. Those are the large 100 school systems are eligible for membership, and of course we're one of those. In this study, 50 of the 67 school districts since 2005 have declined in enrollment. There are only 3 school systems in the Council of Great City Schools that have had a greater percentage increase in enrollment than metropolitan Nashville in the last since 2006, when this data was the beginning of this data. We've grown during that period from 2008-9 to projections next year from 75,000 approximately to over 82,000 students next year. That creates one of the pressures on our budget, and that's a growth in charter school enrollment and a growth in public school enrollment outside of the charter schools. So the numbers are rising on both sides of that equation at the rate of between 1,500 and 2,000 a year. So that really creates one of the unique pressures on our budget here. The second, and I'll elaborate just a little bit more, is a decline in federal funding. We are losing somewhere around $10 million in federal funding this year, and 100 positions basically out of federal budget. This is the last year for Race to the Top funding. Race to the Top's been a great source of innovation for us in the district over the past few years. We're trying to transition this over a 2 or 3 year period of time so that we really do identify the highest yield strategies in Race to the Top and transition them and institutionalize those approaches, if you will. Two of particular interest on our first page are Teach for America. We're transitioning that into operating budget this year. The New Teacher Project is another of those areas that we think is a very high yield strategy. It's not just the loss of Race to the Top, though, that's hurting us with the federal budget. Title I and Title II allocations are down. Those are the mainstays of the federal budget. Our percentage of students who are economically disadvantaged in relationship to the rest of the country has declined some. So the formula is actually working against us in federal funding. And I know that you don't see that in the budget that we present for operating budget, but it has a significant impact on the services and that we can provide and programs that we can provide with that money. So again, our goal is to institutionalize those high yield strategies. There are other things that we'd like to do. We've tried to be conservative with this, but with the pressures we have, we're asking for quite an increase this year. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris and let him present the details.
Thank you, Dr. Register. I've included...
Chris, before you get started,
Sure.
I want to recognize Megan Berry, Ronnie Stein, and Anthony Davis from the council who are here with us. I'm sorry, I meant to do that earlier.
It's fine. I've included at your seat a landscape format document that's titled Outstanding Items, and I wanted to begin by pointing these out because these are items that come to us from Metro government that we had not received prior to the draft budget being presented to the school board on March the 4th. Since that time, we've received 3 of these 6 items, and you can see the budgetary impact that they would have. A little over a $1.2 million increase that is not included in the proposed budget that you have for consideration. We didn't include those because we don't know what the other 3 that are still unknown might look like, and so until we have a a true number. We wanted to go ahead and make sure to point these out at the beginning, that they are not included in the budget proposal that the school board has approved, but they do exist. And so, and we can talk about those in detail if you would like, but until we get all 6 of these items, we're not going to know what the true net effect is going to be on the school district's operating budget. The other one-pager that I have in front of your seat looks like this. It's entitled Budget Proposal Increases, and if you could take that document and we'll sort of look at that in conjunction with document number 1. That's the first page, page number 1 in your operating budget that you have in front of you that's bound. As it says on the front, this budget was approved by the school board on Tuesday. The draft budget has been on the school district's website since March the 4th, when it was first proposed and presented to the school board. And as Dr. Register said, this is our general purpose fund or operating budget. And on page 1, you have the summary of changes. That's the typical document that we include at the beginning of all of the documents that's intended to, as it says, intended to summarize the changes from the current year budget to the proposed budget for next year. And I'm going to probably look more at this one page and then go down, because it's in the same order, and then go down through each of these if you would like and look at dollar figures. But as Mr. Pinkston said in his opening comments, at the top of the page we've got employee compensation. Over 80% of the operating budget for the school district is for labor costs. It's made up of salary and benefits. And we have increases in salaries, which are equivalent to about a $13.5 million increase for salaries, which would include the salary step increments for employees, as well as a 1.5% salary raise for employees. The governor included in his state budget proposal a 1.5% increase in compensation for teachers, and so we've included that and also applied that to all of our employees. We also have increases in benefit costs, particularly as it relates to insurance and pension. As you know, as you remember from previous discussions, all of the certificated employees in the school district, which would be employees that are required to have a teaching certificate based upon their position, they are covered by the state retirement plan, the Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System. And that is a defined benefit plan where an employer contribution rate is given to school districts to pay the state. It's on a 2-year cycle, and fortunately this year we're on the second year of that 2-year cycle, so there is no change. There is an increase in the insurance premiums, a 5.5% increase. That is a 75%, 25% employer-employee split. Which is the same as Metro general government employees. That is administered by the Employee Insurance Trust, which is made up of school board members, MEA representatives, and a retired teacher representative. You can see the breakdown of the different costs as it relates to both our certificated employees as well as our support employees. Our support employees, which would be those in positions that don't require a teaching certificate, they are considered Metro general government employees for benefit purposes. Therefore, their benefits are administered by the Metro Employee Benefit Board. And so you can see the insurance and pension cost increases relating to those employees. Overall, regarding employee compensation, it's about a $17.2 million increase. In the middle part of the page, you have a couple of items. The first being inflation. This is mainly for utility cost increases and fuel cost increases. We do participate in the fuel hedging program, and we're very appreciative that that is in place. It has been something that we feel like has been very, very cost effective, not only for all of Metro government, but specifically for Metro schools, and we're appreciative that that was put into place. But we do have some increases on those fuel hedging contracts. We also have included in the middle part of the page increases as they relate to student enrollment growth. As Dr. Register said, we have student enrollment growth projected in both our charter schools and in our non-charter schools. So we've included 21 additional teaching positions for the projected student enrollment growth in the non-charter schools. That projected growth is somewhere in the neighborhood of around 700 to 750 additional students in the non-charter schools. So we've included additional teachers as well as additional school staff, both regular education teachers as well as exceptional education teachers and exceptional education paraprofessionals. As Mr. Pinkston mentioned, we are opening 5 new charter schools this coming year. We also have existing charter schools that are adding additional grade levels, and so this takes into consideration that transfer of the state and local revenue per pupil amount to the charter schools based upon their enrollment. So that's included here at a cost of about $14.8 million. As we go down the page and look at what's titled Proposed Changes, you'll see a number of changes that, as Mr. Pinkston and both Mr. Pinkston and Dr. Register mentioned, we're calling high-yield strategies that have previously been grant funded. And I'll point out a few of those that, that have already been pointed out. The first two, Teach for America contract and the new teacher project, or Nashville Teaching Fellows. The Teach for America contract in prior years was funded with private dollars. This past year was moved to Race to the Top grant funding, and we have moved it into our local operating budget for this year, knowing that Race to the Top dollars will end after next year to sustain that, that particular contract, and also the new teacher project, which was previously funded with an I-3 grant, an innovation, investing in innovation grant, federal grant, and so we are transitioning those over into our local operating budget to sustain those into the future. We feel like they're very valuable in recruiting and retaining the very best teachers in the school district. We also are including something else that was that has been previously funded through Race to the Top grant funding, which is our English as a Second Language, or ESL, endorsement program, which is a partnership with Lipscomb University, where we have additional teachers that receive that ESL endorsement, which means that they can teach our English learner students in the regular classroom, including them in the regular classroom, without having to pull those students out for a pull-out session with a separate teacher. We've also included some of our data warehouse staff that are currently being funded out of the Race to the Top grant. This is not all. These are not all of the data warehouse staff. We are phasing these over from Race to the Top grant funding over into the operating budget. You'll also see an additional phase-in next year as the Race to the Top grant funding ends. We feel like that's very important to the district. The data warehouse has been something that's been invaluable to schools and principals and teachers. We also are proposing establishing a district STEM office, which previously has been funded through state grant funding. And we've also included 35 exceptional education paraprofessional positions that have previously been funded with federal stimulus funding that is running out, plus we're proposing to add some additional exceptional education paraprofessionals due to student growth. We've also included in this proposed changes section some program enhancements, particularly the Music Makes Us expansion, where we're adding additional teachers to provide additional music offerings in our schools for both traditional and non-traditional music. We also are enhancing our advanced academics area, particularly as it relates to adding additional gifted and talented educators, expanding that program based upon a study that was completed which determined that to provide adequate service to gifted and talented students, we needed to add the number of teachers that we have in that program based upon number of students that qualify. We also are enhancing our college dual enrollment program. The International Baccalaureate, or IB, program is being expanded to Antioch High School as well as to some elementary schools. And the Cambridge ACE program is a part of the advanced academics area, as well as offering high school credits in our middle schools. We're expanding the number of high school credits that are going to be offered in our middle schools so that middle school students can take those courses, particularly algebra, geometry, physical science, and Spanish for high school credit. So looking down through the total on the first page, the summary page, under that proposed changes section is about $6.8 million, the majority of that being transitioning items that we feel like are high-yield strategies from grant funding over to the local operating budget to sustain those efforts. And as has previously been said, it reflects an increase in the budget of just under $44 million, about a 6% increase to a proposed budget of $764 million, again, not including those outstanding items that I mentioned at the onset. Any questions on the summary page, document number 1, page 1?
I don't have any.
Okay, I'll just move fairly quickly then through the remainder, just so you know what's here. Page 2, we always include a document that shows proposed position changes, both positions that are being reduced or eliminated, as well as positions that are being proposed to be added. The proposal is to add approximately 79 total number of positions. A lot of those are teaching positions or exceptional education paraprofessional positions. Page 3 is intended to reflect our 10-month support employee work calendar. Over on the right side, you can see that the proposed work calendar is the same for the current year, but it just breaks down by position the number of paid days based upon number of student days, the number of days that employees are paid for time off, for vacation and holidays, as well as number of paid days for orientation, training, and administrative duties. Page 4, document number 4, shows a breakdown or detail of account number 2600, which is the account for our alternative learning centers. You can see the 3 that we have. The Baxter ALC, that program actually will move to the old Brick Church facility for next year. The old Baxter facility, the board approved Tuesday night a lease with Liberty Collegiate Prep Charter School to occupy the old Jerry Baxter building. We also have an alternative learning center at the Bass location. And then we previously had an alternative learning center at the McCann building. And Tuesday night, the board approved a lease with Nashville Prep Charter School to occupy the McCann building. And what we're going to do regarding our middle school needs is to have 4 satellites around the county in middle schools where students that need to attend an alternative learning center that are in middle schools would go to one of those 4 sites, satellite sites that would be located in existing schools around the county. The next page, document number 5, page 5, shows a breakdown of all of our non-traditional schools, which is a separate account number 2650. Of course, we have our middle college at Nashville State. We have Big Picture, which is located at the Martha Vaught facility. We have our 3 academies, the one at Old Cockrell, the one at Hickory Hollow, and the one at Opry Mills. We have our virtual school, which is housed at the Cone School. Of course, the students are not there. Transitions is housed at the Bass location. Transitions is transitioning students from being incarcerated into the school district. That is located at the Bass building, as I said. And then the Cone School, which is a program for overaged and undercredited students to catch them up so that they can graduate high school on time. The next page, page 6, document number 6, these are the additional resources that were approved as part of the student assignment plan in 2008. As part of that plan, there was a requirement to show a separate schedule and have a separate account for these additional resources, which we do show here in account number 2710. You can see all of the schools that were specifically identified in the student assignment plan in 2008 that would receive additional resources. It's mainly for additional school counselors, additional social workers, reduced pupil-teacher ratios in these schools, as well as additional professional development days, and we've also included costs for transportation, bus drivers and fuel, because we have something called a zoned option, zone choice option, which means that students that were rezoned out of the Pearl Cone cluster could continue to attend schools outside their zone if they so chose, particularly if they were in the Pearl Cone cluster and wanted to attend schools in the Hillwood cluster. We do provide that option, and we do provide transportation for that option, and so we continue to capture those costs within this account. All of these additional costs in account 2710 represent additional resources over and above the regular staffing formula, and you can see what that staffing formula is for these schools down at the bottom left part of the page. Document number 7, page 7, shows a breakdown of all of the charter schools that we will have next year. It also includes our best estimate at this point of the estimated local and state funding that by law is transferred to the charter school based on number of students. You can see all of the different schools, the estimated students for next year. We're estimating that per pupil rate will be $9,100. It will be something different than that based upon true state and local revenue per pupil amount, but that's our best estimate at this point. And then what the estimated allocation will be for each school for next year based upon that amount. As was indicated, we are opening 5 new charter schools. Those are listed at the bottom part of the page. You can see those, the estimated number of students for each. And then at the bottom part of the page, just to make sure everyone understands, we do have one school that's in the State Achievement School District, and that is Brick Church. The Brick Church College Prep. This year, 5th grade was in the ASD. Next year, it'll be 5th and 6th grade. This funding is actually taken off of the top of the school district's state BEP revenue. We don't see this funding. It's taken off of the top of our state funding and distributed directly to the Achievement School District. But the projection next year for 5th and 6th grade at Brick Church is $220. The next page, page 8, begins the 29-page detailed line item budget, document number 8. I'll just go over the column headings so you know what's here. Columns C and D represent current year amended number of positions and current year budget. Columns E and F represent proposed changes in position and budget, resulting in columns G and H, which would be next year's proposed positions, next year's proposed budget, with a column over to the right for explanatory remarks, particularly as it relates to the types of the titles and types of positions and some other things. Again, this is a 29-page document. I'm not planning to go through this. Of course, we'll be glad to go back and look at any particular account that you may have an interest in looking at. But if you would turn over from this page 8 over to page 37, and I'll just point out that we do try to include something in this document that's sorted by alpha sort of all of the different account names, which then would show the account number that you could find in document number 8 in that line item budget. So if you have an idea of what the account name might be, then you can hopefully find it within the line item budget. If you turn over to page 40, I'll briefly touch on 2 other funds that are not included in the general purpose fund operating budget. The first on page 40 is the Nutrition Services Fund. This is required to be a separate self-supporting enterprise fund. If you turn to page 41, 41 just provides a summary of revenue and expenditures, budgeted revenue of $31.7 million, the vast majority of that being federal USDA meal reimbursements. There's also, of course, revenue coming in for meal sales, lunch, breakfast, a la carte sales, very small amount coming in for state matching funding. On the expenditure side, of course, the majority of the expenditures would be for labor, salaries, and benefits. There's, of course, quite a bit of expense for food purchases, and also this particular fund pays its share of the utility costs that the kitchens utilize. And so we've got an estimated revenue and expenditure amount of total revenue and total expenditure amount of just over $42 million. The next page, page 42, just shows expenditures in relation to the same format that's used in the operating budget with the different columns. It totals the same $42 million, approximately 789 staff members or positions in the Nutrition Services Fund. And then in the bottom left, the meal prices. The proposal is not to change the meal prices for next year, and you can see what those different meal prices are. Page 43 just reflects the work calendars for the nutrition services staff located at the schools. Again, based heavily, of course, upon the number of student days. Also pay for paid time off days for vacation and holidays, and then pay for orientation, training, administrative duties, which of course results in the total number of paid days for all of the different types of cafeteria employees at the schools. Page 44. Page 44 is the cover page for the federal programs and grants. The federal fiscal year is different than our fiscal year. It begins on October 1st and runs through September 30th. So we do our best estimate of what we think we're going to be receiving in federal programs and grants. This is all flow-through funding, usually very prescriptive in how the funding can be spent. But at this point in the process, what we are doing is asking for approval of a placeholder amount. Since we don't know what that exact amount of funding will be, the detailed request on spending will come to the board through what's called the consolidated application that will be later on in the year. What we try to do is, of course, since the federal fiscal year is October 1 to September 30th, we have to convert what we think we're going to be receiving and spending to a July 1 to June 30th time frame. You can see on page 45 the next year's projected grant funding. The largest, of course, being Title I, which is funding for students in schools in poverty. We have a large amount of funding for students with disabilities through the IDEA funding. Race to the top and first to the top, again, next year is the last year for this particular funding. The Teacher Incentive Fund, or TIF grant, the Magnet School grant, Title II, Carl Perkins for our CTE program, and then Title III for our English learners. You see the reduction at the bottom of approximately just under $12 million is the proposal at this point, what we're going to see in reduced federal funding. We do include a contingency at the bottom in anticipation of possible additional grant awards. Of course, if we don't receive those grants, the money will not be spent. All of these grants are on a reimbursable basis. So the proposal for next year, the placeholder amount is about $84.6 million for this fund. And with that, that concludes my presentation. Be glad to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, and thank everybody for the statements. Dr. Register, could you talk about the tribal report and the reorganization that was done as a result of that, what the impact of that's going to be?
We announced a restructuring back just after the first of the year, and we're in the beginning stages of implementing that restructuring. We've reduced the number of direct reports at the top of the organization chart to me. We have 5 chief officers now: a chief financial officer, chief operating officer, chief academic officer, chief human capital officer, and chief support services officer. That reduced that number from 12 down to 5. Our goal is to decentralize administration, to give principals greater autonomy and authority in decision making, to make us more nimble, if you will. We are developing lead principals. We have 9 lead principals at the present time, that each supervise or work with small networks of other principals. Our goal is to expand that number to at most 18 lead principals this year. each managing a network of other principals and working with them. That's a soft number. We're not going to promote people into that lead principal role until we know they're ready, until they've demonstrated that, and until we have data that shows that. An outflow of really responsibility from the central office, particularly around the area of instructional leadership to schools, is the goal there. It is a work in progress. When we announced the restructuring back in February, we said that it would take us on the initial phase at least through the first of the year to get that started. So far, the results have been very good. We feel like the restructuring's been accepted very well in the district, and we're already seeing benefits of that. Specific examples: we've restructured human capital and are really trying to give principals a great deal more autonomy and give them an opportunity to hire staff much sooner. And we're seeing the results of that. So we feel like it's a good work in progress, and we've basically accepted the recommendations from Tribal. That was a request on my part for them to let us know what they saw from their 3 years or 2 years of work in the schools, and we're implementing those recommendations.
Well, the Tribal report, I guess in essence what it said was that there was a need for more autonomy. Changes in operations weren't happening fast enough, and progress wasn't happening fast enough. And are you going to continue working with Tribal next year?
Our intention at this point in time is not to continue that contract. It's a race to the top funded contract that's about $1 million a year, and we just simply don't have the resources to continue. We've looked at different components of that program and we feel like we're in a place now where we can manage the change without having an outside consultant available to do that. Part of the thinking along that line too is the two principal leads from Tribal both resigned. David Moran was the last. He left a Tribal organization and is running a network of schools in Great Britain now. And we feel like we will be able to continue that work without having to have an outside consultant. The goal all along was for them to learn what we could from them and then to implement, and we're in the process of doing that.
What recommendations of theirs didn't you accept or adopt?
Their work centered more on, and frankly, the media and coverage on what Tribal's done's been a little bit misleading, because their goal and what we employed them to do was to develop effective schools from inside. So they worked with 34 schools in our district last year. The side product of that was us using them as a consultant to advise us on central office structuring and some of those areas. But that was very much a minor part of what they're doing. It's reform from within, using teacher surveys, parent surveys, focus groups, analyzing data on individual schools. We learned a lot from the data analysis that they've done in the schools, and we feel like we can continue that work.
Okay. And then, I mean, the Tribal consultant fee was somewhere in the area of $6 million.
Right.
And what
total
sort of...
over a 6-year period of time.
And what was is there any budgetary impact of the reorganization or any streamlining?
The intent of the restructuring was not so much to streamline, but to push resources out into schools. You'll see a lot of our programs that are managed out of schools now rather than out of the central office.
But you went from 12 to 5 direct reports,
Right.
but the other 7 people who are no longer direct reports, I mean, they're still performing their tasks, just not reporting directly to you.
That's correct.
All right. And so is there a physical number of reduced people in the front office that we can identify yet?
Not yet. We have a hiring freeze on now in the central office. We're not replacing vacancies. We have, particularly in the area of teaching and learning, we've moved people from central office positions into what will be school-based positions in the future. We'll no longer have curriculum coordinators in the central office. That's a reduction of 8 positions there. Our human capital department is the one that is still a work in progress, and our goal there is to move more toward technology-based, green environment, if you will. And so I think the number of employees in human capital will be reducing over the next few months. But at this point in time, it's still a work in progress.
Right, but then the folks, when it's reduced, whether it's in human capital or whether it's people in different positions in the front office, do they then go and teach, or what do they go and do?
For licensed people, many of those licensed people are tenured teachers, and they would be assigned to classrooms or assigned to school-based coaching positions or other jobs in the district where we have a high number of employees, of course, and there are a lot of vacancies every year, so we certainly want to fill vacancies with people whose jobs might be reduced through restructuring to start. So we try to give them opportunities to move into other jobs in schools.
Okay. And then in terms of, we had the number of additional positions that's in the budget and largely reflected by new teachers and helping with special needs, but is there any reductions in positions at all?
There are some reductions on page number 2 at the top of the page. A gross number of 33.5 positions being reduced, 20 of those being reflective of reducing English learner teachers due to the ESL endorsement program that we have with Lipscomb University that I mentioned earlier, where we are able to include more EL students in the regular classroom so that that regular classroom teacher with that ESL endorsement can teach those students. But we have some others as well that you can see are being reduced.
Okay. So I was just looking at the number. So you have 33.5 reduced and then 79.3 additions.
Actually, 112 additions.
112 additions. Oh, yeah, I looked up. 112 additions and 33 reductions. Is that?
That's correct.
All right. And are any of these reductions part of reorganization, or is it just?
Yes.
Which ones?
The subject area coordinators, 5 positions.
And where those people going into the classroom as new teachers, or?
Will be classroom or instructional coaches that are school-based.
All right.
The other positions there out of the central office, smaller learning communities, specialist reduction, some ALC staff. Those are results of the restructuring. The top three positions.
Okay. How has the recruiting with the new starting teacher salary that was increased last year, how's that going?
Excellent. We've had we've got our best applicant class of that we've ever had. Of course, we're just in the heart of the hiring season now. I think we have a new teacher fair tomorrow, or it's tomorrow or next weekend, one tomorrow, I believe. Tomorrow. And our HR people tell us that the recruiting class is extremely good. Last year it was a rumor, and we saw benefits from the salary change last year, but we're really seeing good benefits from that this year as we recruit.
Mayor, if I could, in the short time I've been on the board, watching the talent recruitment operation evolve into a much higher performing unit has been one of the most notable things that I've seen. We're more aggressively recruiting, more aggressively communicating with our suppliers of teaching talent about what our needs are. That's been one of the most significant changes that hasn't been kind of public facing, but it's impressive to see what's going on behind the scenes there.
Right. How has how many new teachers are you requesting this year?
21.
21 regular education, 5 exceptional education, and plus the music makes us music teachers.
In terms of special needs and special education, how many schools do you operate now?
As far as special needs schools, next year we will offer, I guess it's going to be 3, Mayoral, Harris-Hillman, and then Cora Howe.
And the Johnson School will close at the end of this year?
Correct.
And is that closure reflected in the budget?
It's the intent is for it to at least be a wash. What the plan is, we've got a request for proposals out now for contracting those services to those students that attended Johnson, and we haven't received those results yet. But the intent is for it at least to be a wash regarding the cost of the contract in relation to the costs that we currently have running or utilizing the Johnson facility. We're hopeful that there might be some savings there, but we just don't have the numbers yet.
I don't know where I saw it, but I think I saw something in the budget where I think it was still budgeted for 4 schools and 4 principals. I don't know. Is that right?
It is. Since we didn't have a number, what we will do is come back and amend the budget during the year. Once we know what that contracted number will be, we'll increase the contracted services and decrease where you would currently see the Johnson costs.
And then the teachers who are assigned to Johnson and the principal, where do they go in the new school year?
They're displaced, and they'll be reassigned to other vacancies in the district. The operation there is there are a relatively low number of students in that program. We do have an outside provider now. That's a very high-cost program, and we expect to save some money by outsourcing that program for all of those students, and also improve services for those children. So we feel like it's a good change program-wise for the children served there, and it'll also be more efficient for us. Our plan for that building is 2 steps, really. Rose Park Middle School will be relocated in that building next year while the renovation's going on. And then after that, we intend to use Johnson as an ALC location, Alternative Learning Center location. We're moving out of Baxter ALC now, which is not a good location to serve the southern part of the county. And Johnson will be an excellent facility for that. As you know, it's on 2 Metro bus lines that really serve the main arteries going into the southern part of the county to Antioch and Nolensville Pike and in that whole area. And Johnson will be a really good location for that. It's actually our largest ALC in terms of numbers as we go forward.
And then, how are you doing with special needs students with disabilities? Do you have the resources you need, or is there more?
Well, we could ask for more in a lot of different areas. I think special needs is one of those areas where we could ask for more. We feel like we're making good progress in serving special needs children. The main thing that we've done is decentralize program location. More special needs children are served in their home schools. And more special needs children are included in regular classrooms, inclusion program. That's really the work that we've done, and we feel good about that. We've had 2 cuts in federal budget that have really impacted us there, and I'm sure you'll recall that last year we had a loss of about 100 positions in special ed through the stimulus program. We're taking those cuts again this year, and that's special needs stimulus money that ends this year, and we're replacing that. So we feel like we're doing okay. We're holding our own there. Could we use more? The answer is yes.
Okay. And what's the status of Teach for America in terms of the contract? How many teachers are you going to have?
Where our contract gets us up to 100, I believe, next year, and we're continuing those. It's a 2-year contract for each teacher we contract with, so our budget's actually going up to account for that phase-in up to 100.
And they're still doing very well and rank high for.
Yes.
In terms of teacher preparation and test results?
Test results are very good. Of course, the problem with Teach for America, or one of the problems that we deal with, is that after a couple of years, a high percentage of those teachers leave. So we're really trying to develop some programs that will keep a higher percentage of those children, those teachers, for a longer period of time. For example, one of our programs that we're very proud of is our Teacher Leadership Institute. That's for third-year teachers, the top performers in the district, and we've already seen good results in keeping some TFAs who had intended to leave. We're getting people to stay and to move into leadership positions. We're very proud of that.
Rich?
Yeah, I might have just a couple follow-ups. I think it'd be interesting. It looks like there's, I don't know, I can do the math quickly, $2 or2.5 million worth of sort of federal stimulus or race to the top money that's sort of in this year's budget. And that's been, I think it'd be interesting to see. You may know the numbers in terms of, since all the federal programs, really kind of the stimulus money and the race to the top money, how much of that has been absorbed into the local funding aspect, or the local or state funding, your real budget, not out of the federal money. You know how much of that now you've transferred over and kept of those programs?
Yeah, this is really the first year where we've done that, because the stimulus funding for exceptional education will end. We know that Race to the Top grant funding, which was in excess of $30 million, will end next year. So this is really the first year where we've begun to phase in some of those changes. And again, not nearly all of what we've been doing, but as has been indicated previously, we tried to look at everything that was happening with grant funding where we knew the funding was going to sunset, and it was a pilot in some cases to try some different things and see what kind of results we get. And so once we've seen some results, there are some of those things that we've determined these are really high yield strategies that we want to continue. So it's in the neighborhood of around $4 million that we are moving from grant funding over into the operating budget to sustain those efforts. And that's a number of different types of grants, anything from Race to the Top to the I-3 grant to state STEM hub grant to federal stimulus dollars.
And what's your guess as the percentage of those programs that are being continued? I mean, because you've received a lot more money than that. You're obviously picking and choosing those areas that you want to.
That's correct.
Right, and we will be continuing to phase in some of these in next year's budget as well. We didn't want to get to the end of the grant funding cycle and then have to do it all in 1 year. So some of these are actually phased in this year, where we'll have an additional phase in next year. I don't have the percentage of the total, but I think the total we're looking at is about $4 million. that will be moved over to the operating budget.
So another statistic that's related, in our third year of Race to the Top, which is this current year, we had we were projected to spend about $9.5 million. Next year, the balance for the last year is going to be a little over $3 million. So that's pretty significant reduction in funds that we have there.
So we would anticipate maybe a similar number next year or more in terms of federal money moving over. Too early to
Possibly. Some of these we've gone ahead and moved over, like Teach for America and the New Teacher Project. We moved the entire contract
Right, so
over.
that's-
Some of them are phased in,
Phased in.
so it just depends upon the decisions based upon results.
We did pick those highest yield strategies this year, though, that we wanted to protect. And so I think we're beginning to prioritize what we want to do by putting those in first. Might not be quite as much impact next year, but we need to try the rest of these programs for another year and see how they're working.
My only other really question is my favorite subject, revenues. Of course, I like revenue when it comes from other places. It makes my life a little simpler. I know we have the estimates on the BEP number for next year, and so then the other piece of that would be student growth, right, is kind of the other large potential revenue source. And so I think you thought you would have about 7 or 750 as sort of the working number for the schools, and then another group would go to charter schools in terms of the growth. Is that
For student enrollment
For
growth?
student enrollment growth, yeah.
Correct. We're estimating between 7 and 750 additional students in the non-charter schools,
Right.
and about 950 to 1,000 in the charter school
So
growth.
pretty consistent with what I think earlier this year, I got some numbers from you all, and he said about 1,700 would be the anticipated growth. And so if that hold true, that would generate some additional revenue from the state.
It would.
Per head, how much, what do they usually, you know what that would break down? We could argue over the numbers at some point in time, but how much that would translate to?
Not per student, but I've estimated somewhere in the neighborhood, and this is probably a high-end estimate,
Yeah.
of around $7 million
$7 million.
additional funding for student growth. It's difficult to calculate because it's all relative to the growth throughout the state.
Yeah, I understand.
There's a finite amount of money for student enrollment growth that the State Department has, and if actual student enrollment growth throughout the state exceeds that amount, then they start reducing the amount that each district would get so that they don't go over the total.
There's some number there. We can talk later offline about what number you're comfortable putting in a budget, but there's some number there.
Right.
All right, good, thanks.
Greg? Yeah, I've got a question for Chris. It's sort of a budget mechanics question. If you'll turn to page 21 of 29 of the
He
budget.
just wanted to do that. You know, he
wanted to do that
doesn't
for
really have
Chris.
a question. He just wanted to be able to answer that question. That's good.
So if one were trying to understand and get their head around the transportation costs associated with schools, does this get it all?
This is the total amount that the district spends on transportation.
Would that include a maintenance worker driving a maintenance van somewhere? Would that show up somewhere else?
It will include the cost of that maintenance worker's vehicle.
Okay, so like
the
a fleet function.
Correct. This does include not only school bus transportation, but also what we call our white fleet, which would be maintenance vehicles, security vehicles,
Right.
IT vehicles. All of that is captured within the transportation category, the 4000 series.
And then when you aggregate and go to a line item that says, I forget what it is, what is the right term that you use back here? Total operation of plant. What's made up in that number?
A lot of it is utilities,
Right.
utility costs. Also, our custodial and groundskeeping services contract is included in that particular category.
Are there any trends related to transportation, utility, maintenance, other things like that give you any concerns going forward? Are they growing rapidly? Do any of those things concern you, or are they pretty stable and predictable?
Well, if you look at, for instance, maintenance of facilities, we've basically held the line on those.
Right.
The only increases you would see would be inflationary or benefit cost increases. Transportation, the same way. As I said earlier, we're fortunate to have the fuel hedging contracts in
Right.
place that help us budget for fuel costs because we basically know what the top end's going to be. Utilities are always an estimate, and we usually try to use the same utility cost increases that Metro Finance uses for the rest of the government. So I don't see any big trends as far as changes go. They're fairly consistent and fairly flat.
In the last capital spending plan, sort of shifting subjects, we did I believe $100 million for new school projects. Can you give us an update on how that's going and what's the status of those, or do you have that with you? Or
Sure, I've got it off the top of my head. I don't have it written, but all of the projects are moving along. And first of all, let me say that we're very appreciative of the capital funding that we did receive, the $100 million, a sizable, significant amount. Some of the projects are a little further along than others, depending upon the size of the projects. We will actually have the first two projects, the bids will come in first part of next month, and we'll go to the board for approval at their May 14th meeting. I believe that's for the classroom additions at A.Z. Kelly Elementary, as well as the renovation project at Antioch Middle School. Both of those, we're hoping that the board will approve those in May. Of course, all of them have architects employed and working with staff to design the plans, but they're all moving along, and we're excited about each one of them.
And during the course of the year, we worked out something we could do with freeing up capital money to be used on safety issues. Is that all moving forward?
It is. What we tried to do is, based upon your letter to us, we looked at any account that where we felt like there might be some additional funding for an approved project and/or contingency accounts to go ahead and begin the process of safety and security upgrades at our schools, particularly as it relates to security cameras, to exterior entrances, with electronic entrance requirements, classroom doors with the new what are called intruder locks. Those are the main areas where we've been looking. Tony Majors, who's here, has been heading that project up along with our facilities staff, and so we've made some pretty large orders. Of course, we're in line with most every other school district across the country that's trying to purchase these same types of things. So there is some type of delay, but we're moving forward as quickly as we can on that.
Question capital?
No, we're obviously looking at your list, and we're going to, make some recommendations to the council here, and about the same time we do the operating budget. And so, we probably will need to have some more conversations. I'm not sure we're going to be able to fund the entire request, but we support what's going on there and support the changes in schools.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Nothing else?
Nope.
Well, first of all, thank you for coming to the hearing. Always well prepared and very informative. I think that schools are moving in the right direction. As I said before, I'm very concerned about urgency and results, but I think we're pulling in the same direction, which is a good thing. This is a difficult budget for us because I think someone said there's just limited resources. There's finite resources. And if you look back over the course of the time that I've been mayor, I came into office when the budget was for the schools was about $597 million. And in the current year now, it's about $720 million. So we have substantially gone up in school spending during my time as mayor, and certainly the amount of increase in the school budget surpasses by a great deal increase in enrollment. The proposed budget this year, if funded in full, would be a 6.1% increase. And somewhere along the line, you have to factor in the money that came out of the supplemental appropriation
For the textbooks.
for the textbooks to $764 million. Schools are the most important issue for the city. It's the thing we got to get right. It takes up 42% of our budget. Just to put it in perspective, in the last 2 years, if you count the proposed budget and what was paid last year, the increase to the schools is about $90 million. And you look at the whole past 6 years, we've increased the general government by about $43 million. So there's been a time for the last few years where the general government has cut back, not given pay increases, had layoffs, cuts on really every department but public safety. So if you look at the percentages, we've got essentially, in my first year of doing the budget, 4%, 09, 10, no increase whatsoever. That was the depths of the recession. 10, 11, 2% increase over prior year, but actually 4% if we tapped into reserves. 11, 12, 6.4%. Then 12, 13 last year, 6.9%. And I think, we'll do the very best we can. I appreciate the hard work that's put into all this, but I'm just need to frame this up because the floodgates of money have not opened. We're confined by the revenue that we have, and in terms of this sort of increase, and for the last 3 years, would result in significant cutbacks in the departments who already have gone through much more severe cutbacks than you all have. And so that's part of it. So we'll do the best we can, and we appreciate you making this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.